Americans who visited Europe. What was your biggest WTF moment? Story 1. Funny enough, my biggest WTF moment came from an American. We were at a restaurant in Cinque Terre, Italy, called Trattoria del Billy. About halfway through our meal, I overheard a guy with a Tennessee/Arkansas accent say, verbatim, in a frustrated tone, "You need to speak more American," to his waiter. This isn't Rome. This isn't Venice. It's a small town called Manarola. The odds of finding someone fluent in your language are drastically lowered. However, this guy was pompous enough to not only continue to berate his waiter, but then tell the manager who came around that he needs to hire someone who can speak American in a foreign country, of which he obviously speaks zero of their language. Seriously, WTF? Story 2. One time in Rome, it started pouring. As I sought shelter, I saw an older man selling one single umbrella. Strange as it was, I needed that umbrella, so I haggled with him and settled on €3. He had the upper hand in that transaction. I wander over to a coffee shop to dry out for a little bit. When I go to leave, the umbrella is no longer in the bucket by the door. Upset at myself for being so trusting, I head into the rain again. Guess who I see? The old man selling the same umbrella. I try to confront him about stealing back my umbrella, but he claims not to remember our interaction at all. It's pouring and I have a number of miles to walk, so I go through the same charade with him again to re-procure the umbrella. At least this time he took €2. Story 3. Spent a summer in Germany. They had the cleanest/safest/best tasting tap water, but nobody drank it and they called it toilet water. Also, the older people in the village seemed super grumpy and mean, and would never smile or respond if you said hello or good morning. But if you asked them a substantive question, like how to get to the museum, they would spend 15 minutes telling you the fastest way to get there, the scenic way to get there, everything interesting you should do on the way there, why that museum isn't actually that good and you should go to this other museum instead, all the different ways to get to the better museum, and where their grandmother used to live before the war. Story 4. Went to Sweden on a vacation package. Stayed at a wonderful historic hotel for part of the trip that had a restaurant inside of it. Part of our package called for a free dinner at the hotel, and we had asked that it be the night we arrived. We arrived and got settled in our room, and then went to check out the restaurant. As soon as we walked in, there was no one there, only a hostess. She immediately said they were expecting us, and we could sit anywhere. There was no one else in this gorgeous ornate restaurant. A waiter came out and said they had prepared a special meal for us. We asked why it was so empty, and he said the restaurant was closed 1 day a week and today was that day. We were shocked. We apologized profusely and then told them we had booked through another company and we would have just scheduled it for another day. He said it was no problem and we had some free extras such as wine and dessert. The main course ended up being a huge piece of meat, which we jokingly said must have been because we were big fat Americans. No one rushed us, we had a great time, and after we left they closed the restaurant for the night. It was a total WTF moment because if you booked something like this in America, they'd either force you to reschedule or just have the restaurant closed with no explanation. Story 5. We were driving through Spain, and to the side of one of the roads, we noticed these massive birds' nests in the high-powered electrical towers. They were at least twice the size of eagle nests that I had seen, and there were so many of them. Then we saw these giant birds in them. We stopped by the side of the road and tried to take some pictures. Didn't have a great zoom lens, sadly, but no one else was stopping. It was so odd. We are accustomed to at least a few people stopping to watch the osprey, eagles, and other birds where I'm from. So, a few days later, we were chatting with a German tourist, and we brought up the birds. I think she thought we were joking until we pulled out the pictures. Then she started laughing. Storks. Those are storks. Of course, don't you know that? They're everywhere and such a nuisance. Don't you have storks in America? Well, no. Then she looked confused. Well, if you don't have storks, who brings the babies and kids stories? Storks. How does that work? And that was when we realized that the story of the storks makes a whole lot more sense when storks are nesting on every chimney, tree, or tall place. Story 6. It was subtle at first, but it eventually boggled my mind how old everything was, and it was still integrated into everyday life. For in the UK, drinking in a pub that had been in the same spot since the 11th century, or eating at a restaurant in the 18th cathedral, or in Prague, going to a club in a 14th century stone cellar, or staying at a hotel/brewery that had been operating since the 15th century. The oldest building in my vicinity is from the 1750s, which is prehistoric by US standards, but someone in Europe sees a building that is half a millennium old that no one is using, and they're like, let's turn this into a disco. I loved it. Story 7. I lived in Germany for 8 years, from 1992 to 2000, ages 4 to 12. I didn't realize it until I moved back to the States, but there were recycling bins on every street corner. It wasn't just a green bin and then a trash can, it was a giant blue bin. One section for green glass, one for brown glass, one for clear glass, one for plastic, and one for paper. Oh, and going to a German school, students took public transit. There wasn't such a thing as a school bus. Story 8. I am from the NY/NJ area, and I've seen firsthand how out of control sporting events can get. Guys mostly get drunk, vandalize property, throw cans and bottles, fight, etc. So when a group of friends went to Germany for Oktoberfest some years ago, we also wanted to see a soccer game. So we got tickets to see Bayern Munich versus some other German team in what I think was a meaningful game. We went more for the experience versus being huge fans. The game is great. I think the score was 5-1, so lots of action. The energy in the stadium was undeniable. Fans sang, jumping around, and yelling for the entire game. Game ends. Munich wins. Begins the march to the subway station. Virtually the entire stadium, it seemed, was excited to go to one nearest subway shop. There are 4, maybe 5 cops standing at the entrance steps. Uh-oh. This is going to be a huge problem. Thousands of people, lots of them intoxicated, heading towards these 5 cops at this one exit. It's going to be a disaster. Some guys start pissing on a fence within their view. What are they doing? And then, as we watched nervously, the crowd reached the cops and just stopped. Everyone stopped. No one fought. The guys pissing finished their business, zipped up, and joined the queue. Cops let enough people by to fill the first train, then the rest stopped, and so on and so forth until our group went. It was incredible. That scene hadn't happened in America. Maybe it was an anomaly. But picturing an event at MSG, there's an army of state troopers to keep order, in addition to local cops, undercover cops, event security, etc. And brawls and things still erupt with regularity. This was amazing to us. We still talk about it years later. That was some respectful, organized, and orderly stuff. Story 9. Every night in Spain, around 3 a.m., this massive fleet of street scrubbers, vacuum mobiles, and water hoses appeared and cleaned the entire city for about an hour. It was like around 100 people every night just cleaning the city. The following morning, all of Salamanca was spotless. That stuff was magical. Story 10. I went to the Netherlands for a music festival over the summer last year. The night before I went to a show and met a Scottish guy who came over and said, "You look American." I replied yes, and he immediately started talking about American politics and the military. It was weird how he assumed I was completely knowledgeable about all upper-level government doings, but otherwise he was a chill dude. The fact that there's no AC, I didn't realize it wasn't standard and was melting in my hotel room. How uncommon asking for ice is. I've never gotten stranger looks when I would ask for a drink with some ice. One person at the festival had to confirm she understood me, lol. Story 11. In Italy, there is virtually no threshold for how much distance should be left between a speeding car and any obstacles, including pedestrians, it is zooming past. A bus driver will rush down a narrow cobblestone street with about a centimeter to spare between the sides of the bus and any parked cars, walls, ancient monuments, or playing children. Story 12. When I visited the hospital and had x-rays done, spoke with 2 doctors, and was triaged by a nurse, all with no health insurance, and my total bill was 24 euros. Then I had to pay 10 additional euros for some painkillers, again, with no insurance or anything. Story 13. The littering in a lot of places really blew me away, especially in France. Part of this is due to the amount Europeans smoke, I guess, because at times in Paris, the cobblestone felt paved with cigarette butts. The quality of your fast food surprised me. Everything from the street vendors to chain fast food like McDonald's was better quality than anything I'd gotten in Canada. The people at every tourist site trying to sell you their crap was new to me. Knew it was coming, but was still surprised by how widespread it was. Really took me by surprise when I saw some of them pulling the water bottles they had to sell out of the sewers in the morning, though it makes sense in hindsight. Prague was even cheaper than I had been told. It was great to be eating like a king without spending much, which was refreshing after some of the more expensive countries. Munich blew me away with how well culture and modernization were integrated. Definitely my pick for the city I wanted to live in the most. Story 14. I lived in Spain for 9 months at one point and was trying to get to the supermarket in the middle of a weekday, and the entire city center was blocked off. I had to park and walk ways and discovered that they were having a giant block party, kegs and all, around noon, celebrating the town's new garbage trucks. I love Spain. Story 15. This was a few years ago before chip, credit/bank cards were like a thing in the States. But when I stopped in Amsterdam and hopped over to Latvia, I discovered that in both countries, my debit card, which needed to be swiped to buy anything, was like a weird old relic. Every cashier everywhere gave me a confused look when I handed them my card, and they saw it didn't have a chip. They would, after I politely mentioned it had to be swiped, question whether or not that was even possible for their registration. They always looked shocked to discover that the little slat along the side of their credit card was to be used to slide a card through. And when it actually worked, they actually looked even more shocked. That's the first time I learned, oh crap, maybe America is behind in a lot of ways, because everyone looked at my card as if it were carved out of stone and would pay them in some Flintstone-style currency that they were convinced they couldn't actually accept. By day 2 of the trip, even I was like, you freaking American crap with your ancient technology. Story 16. This wasn't a visit to Europe, but I was responsible for email servers for a company that had offices we just opened in Italy. Shortly after the office was opened, our system kept flagging porn coming from the Italy people, men and women. Lots of porn. Lots of crazy porn. We let HR know, and HR called the Italian office. Turns out the Italians have a nationally protected right to porn. Story 17. The country of Hungary. I became fascinated with their history because they seem so unlike any other European country. While the country is pretty modern and Budapest is very modern, they seem ancient. It's hard to explain. The language seems ancient as well. You know how when you go to a new country and they're basically the same 10 faces repeated over and over? I've never seen the standard Hungarian look before. That was the one place I'd say the people looked exotic, more so than people from places further east. Story 18. I was doing a study abroad program in the UK, but also had to take the monthly blood test for a medication I had been put on before I flew over. I was fully prepared for a laundry list of paperwork and fees to deal with the tests as well as getting these results to my doctor back in the States. After the first blood test, I went up to the receptionist and asked what I owed. She looked at me with a bit of confusion and said, "Oh no, you're fine. You can just go." My doctor also got my blood results in less time than they did when I got them in the States. Screw our broken healthcare system. Story 19. Years ago, my wife and I were in Amsterdam. We were strolling around the opera house at night and unexpectedly came across an outdoor art exhibit. It was photographed by Jan Arthus Bertrand. The pictures were absolutely amazing, and we spent what felt like hours looking at them. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a group of scantily dressed men on rollerblades, decorated with lights and blaring disco music, came rollerblading by in a train and sped off into the night. It was mind-blowing at the time. Definitely WTF, but in a good way. Story 20. We went to Rome, Florence, and Paris after my first year in college as a French major. I think I was just amazed the whole time, like, wow, this building is hundreds of years older than my country I live in. The architecture of everything was stunning. My favorites were the Duomo in Florence and the Notre Dame de Paris. Story 21. The sheer amount of alcohol that some people drink. Went out with some women in Portsmouth, England, and each ordered a couple of bottles of wine for themselves. At first I was impressed, but then they got pretty sloppy as the night went on. Story 22. In Germany, they have to give something like 60 days notice if they're planning to fire/planning to quit a job. For some reason, that seems so crazy, but I realized being fired with no notice is pretty screwed, and we should have a similar system, honestly. And how great the recycling system was. And also, I didn't realize the water closet was the bathroom until after my trip. I felt stupid. Really stupid. Story 23. Not paying for a gynecological exam. I developed an ovarian cyst while in England that was causing some pain. I made an appointment at a health clinic and was examined. Afterward, I expected to pay because A, that's always the first thing that happens in US healthcare, and B, I was a foreigner who had never paid into the UK National Health Service. They just laughed and said, "We don't take money for services, and we have no idea what to charge you." Mind blown. God save the National Health Service. Story 24. How nice everyone in France was to me. Was told by everybody to expect the worst. Ended up meeting the nicest of people, and honestly have only nice things to say about the people in Avignon, Tours, and Paris. The best was Tours by far. Ran into some snowboarders and bonded over that for a bit. Bought rounds for each other, talked about Chicago, apparently one of the few cities they happen to have visited and I live in. Given free drinks at a bar for drinking Gardeniera-laced rum, spiciest shot ever, that they kept on a little pedestal. Hell, even the police and I had a great chat about MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu randomly on a local bus. Nothing but praise for the French. Honestly, that is my dream to go back there someday. Sorry if that's not a typical WTF moment, but I kept thinking every day, this is it, I'm going to run into the ass today. Never happened though. Story 25. Rented a car and drove around Ireland for a week. One late evening, another driver started flashing his lights at me and waving. I realized I had my brights on for a while I was behind him and was expecting to get bitched out for it. I stopped to apologize, but instead of getting bitched out for it, the other driver was incredibly polite and just wanted to make sure I knew to turn them off. In the States, you expect road rage for any minor infraction. Story 26. I went to Paris and Amsterdam as part of a school trip that was organized. Amsterdam is my favorite place, and we saw something interesting happen. When we were waiting for the bus, we sat by the canals in the heart of Amsterdam. There are a lot of stores and restaurants and such. So, a dude and a girl in a motorboat show up. The girl climbs the wall of the canal in her bathing suit and starts walking across the street towards a restaurant. While she's doing that, the guy pulls out a neat little velvet bag and dips a tiny spoon into it. He pulls out a little pile of powder and sniffs it hard. I heard someone say, "Did he just do cocaine?" And this caught the attention of the school group, and everyone pointed it out. While we're doing that, the dude goes for another loud rip, then gently puts his materials away after the girl returns, and they drive off. The tour guide just said, "People do whatever here." Story 27. I was in Amsterdam 2 years ago and went into a coffee shop to try the local green and saw that they sold various nugs and hash and also pre-rolled joints. 5 joints for €15, so I bought those. Start to smoke one of them and realize that it's a half weed, half tobacco and I get a nicotine buzz/headache. I hate tobacco. So I asked the guy if he wants the remaining 4 joints back because I didn't want them, and instead, he trades me the joints back for a few grams of dank called Morrison, which, by the way, was some of the best I've ever had. Was not expecting to get a trade. Was expecting a "sorry about your luck" type response. Also, on the counter was a cookie jar filled with shakes from the leftover herb people would leave behind from rolling joints, and discovered that the cookie jar was a community weed jar that anyone was welcome to use free of charge. I believe the place was called The Coffee Shop. Story 28. In my early 20s, on my first trip to Europe, I took an Italian ocean liner from New York to Genoa. My WTF moment was going out on the deck on morning 6 of the foggy passage through the Straits of Gibraltar, Europe emerging through the mist on the left and North Africa on my right, coupled with the awareness of how many voyagers throughout history had sailed through that passage, including my Italian grandparents traveling in the other direction, gave me chills. Story 29. I had several, and here they are in summary. Almost no 24-hour convenience stores in Paris. There is a long and varied list of tourist scams in Barcelona. Always keep an eye out. Research well for good eats in Rome. A lot are overpriced tourist traps with okay food. Amsterdam has a load of food options. Unlimited ribs, roast duck rice, Nepalese cuisine. They have everything for your munchies. Story 30. The fact that Europeans do not tip waitstaff. A few things I note on this. Waitstaff are paid a living wage in Europe, so they do not need tips. The eating experience is much more laid back / slower in Europe relative to America. It also seems like the waitstaff is never trying to force you out of the restaurant in Europe once you're done eating. Waitstaff hardly check on you in Europe. If you want something from the waitstaff, you have to really flag them down. In some cases, flagging down your waitstaff can be seen as rude in the USA. However, it is nice to more easily know what you're going to spend on a meal in Europe. I thought this was really weird when I first went to Europe, and it took some getting used to. Story 31. The lack of work ethic in Italy was mind-blowing. I was traveling all around Europe for about 3 months doing somewhat physical labor. I would get local work at each place. Language barriers were problematic, but manageable, except in Scotland. I just stared at people while I tried to replay what they said in my head. Once we got to Italy, though, these guys would just walk away in the middle of a task. Una sigaretta. Poof, gone for 30 minutes. Milan, Rome, Naples, and Padua all have the same experience. Everywhere else was great, even France, which people warned me about. But the French guys kicked ass. Story 32. Went to Paris and sat down at a cafe by the hotel. It was early lunch, but we were starving. Sit and wait 10 minutes for the waiter to say hi. 5 more for a drink order, 10 more to get drinks, 5 more to order food, and 15 to 20 for the food. 35 until we see him again to order dessert, 15 waiting for dessert, 10 more to get the check after eating dessert. I know he gave us special treatment because we're Americans. He basically ignored the other tables he had, and they would yell things at him in French as he went by. It was nuts how laid back the restaurant experience was, but honestly, I miss it. Story 33. I was 15 years old, ordering a beer at McDonald's.